Alright, ladies and gentlemen, gear up and be ready to enter the water in 20. That was the call I heard from Victor, our team leader, as I stood on the rear deck of the research vessel Adriani class, the chilly wind and biting sea spray of the Atlantic hitting me in the face, as I stared out at the dark blue waves crowned with white caps. Above my head on its tether dangled a yellow submersible, the restraints holding it in place, letting out small soft creaks of protest as she shifted with the ship bobbing up and down in the waves, only kept in place by her anchor. I turned and looked out over the opposite side of the ship. As we were about 300 miles offshore, I couldn't see land, but I knew just over the horizon to the north lay Nantucket Island, to the west, New York City. As I looked back towards shore, a particularly nasty gust of wind slapped into my back, sending a shiver straight up my spine. I quickly flipped the collar of my coat up to protect myself, then looked around me at the others gearing up. "Mitchell, you'll be going in the submersible this time. Due to your hand," he called again, striding over to check on the 4 scuba divers who were being assisted in their twin tanks and weight belts. I glanced down at the bandage on my right hand and sighed heavily. Of freaking course, I had to hurt myself right before the voyage, I thought miserably. Any injury is detrimental when you're on the job. When you're a professional scuba diver and underwater surveyor, it's disastrous and can bend you. I'd been looking forward to this trip for months, feeling as giddy as a kid in a candy shop with a $20 bill scrunched up in his hand. But when I distractedly looked up from fetching a late night snack due to my wife, I'd ended up with my hand slammed in the door of our vintage refrigerator. I'd despaired that I'd be forced to just stay topside, letting the others have the adventure I'd waited for almost a year. But luckily for me, Victor knew how badly I wanted to go, and so had convinced Jake, our resident submersible pilot, to swap out for me, at least on the first dive. The submersible, nicknamed the Halibut by the crew, lowered down until it sat on the deck, allowing me to rather delicately climb up and slide into the single-man cockpit. To say it was a cramped space would be understating it. You barely had room to breathe in this thing with all the gauges and pipes everywhere. It was a place that, if you had claustrophobia, would have been more or less hell. I heard someone else climb up the side and turned my face up to find Jake's smiling face staring down at me as he began to pull the overhead hatch closed. "Don't have too much fun down there," he called to me. "Remember to save a little bit for me." I laughed. "Don't worry, bro. I'll make sure to let you at least get the first look at the rusting propellers." He laughed at my quip, quickly flipping me the bird in a good-natured manner before closing the hatch and sealing it. Shaking my head and still chuckling to myself, I slipped into the seat and buckled myself in as I felt the winch begin to lift me off the deck. I felt a slight sense of dizziness as it rocked back and forth, watching the deck slide away under me and be replaced by the waves. Then, it began to be lowered into the ocean. The rocking intensified as the halibut bobbed up and down in the waves like a cork, and I took a deep breath, fighting off the slight feeling of seasickness which had begun to creep up on me like a predator. 2 safety divers swam over to me, unhooking the submersible from its tether and making final checks to be sure the outer hull was in safe condition. One of them formed his hand into the OK sign, signaling that I was good to go, and I mirrored his gesture as I slipped on my headset. "Halibut to control, all final checks have been made. We are ready for descent," I said into the mic. A short crackle of static filled my headset, and then I heard Victor's voice greet my ears. "Halibut, this is Control. You are go for descent. Enjoy the trip." "Copy that," I replied, then reached out and pulled the handle to my right. The sound of the submersible's ballast tanks emptying filled my ears, and with a last look at the cloudy sky over my head, I slipped below the waves. Instantly, the dizzying feeling left me, and I felt a growing sense of happiness flow through me. I'm home. Ever since I'd been a child, I'd been in love with the ocean, and I'd felt more at home when I was in it, and especially on the water than I did on land. It was why I'd worked to get my oceanography degree from Florida State, and then spent another couple years getting certified for deep water diving, both as a submersible pilot and a diver. I'd excelled at my study so greatly that a private research and surveying corporation, which I won't name, hired me as soon as I graduated. I spent years diving on shipwrecks and other archaeological sites. By the age of 33, I'd already visited the wrecks of the Titanic, the Lusitania, and countless others. But the wreck I was heading to now had been one of the ones I'd looked forward to the most. I looked at the depth gauge near the small porthole window to the outside. Passing 50 feet, I said into my mic. Only about 200 feet to go, I thought. The light had already begun to fade from the surrounding ocean, and I felt a small pang of excitement and fear shoot through me. Some people may find venturing into the depths of the ocean where little to no light can reach utterly terrifying. For me, it was an adventure I looked forward to every time. I loved seeing the deep ocean creatures swimming past my window. Loved the sounds of being far down. Because sound travels farther in water than air, you can hear the call of a whale hundreds of miles away, and the sound is equal parts haunting and beautiful. And contrary to popular belief, underwater is not silent, especially in a submersible. You can hear the sound of the current rushing by outside quite often. It almost sounds like what I imagine the winds on another planet to be like to hear. I tapped the mic. "Victor, you mind if I put on some music to keep myself company while I head down?" There was another burst of static.
"No problem at all, Mitch,"
I heard him say.
"Just don't play it so loud you can't hear me. The divers are in the water, and they'll be beginning their descent in 10 minutes.
I grinned. "Copy that. I'll be waiting for them down there," I said, then turned to a small wall-mounted yellow boombox to my right. As I watched the depth gauge pass 100 feet, I pulled a cracked CD case from under the seat and dropped the disc into the player. A few moments later, the small cabin was filled with the husky, seductive voice of Diana Dors as she began to sing Imagination. I leaned back into the seat, my smile widening. The golden age of Hollywood singer and actress was always my choice of soundtrack for my dives in the sub. I watched the gauges, then let my gaze flick over to a small black and white photograph of what I'd be seeing shortly. The Andrea Doria. The ship had been my unicorn, the one I'd wanted to dive on and see ever since I'd been a child and learned about her and her sad fate. She'd been one of the more luxurious ocean liners in the Italian fleet, streaming back and forth from Europe to the US ever since she'd gone into service in 1953. That was until the fateful day on July 25th, 1956, when during a passage through a particularly thick fog bank, she'd collided with another ship, the Stockholm. The Swedish ocean liner had been badly injured, but still managed to make it back to New York Harbor. The Andrea Doria, however, hadn't been so lucky. Having been struck at a 90-degree angle and in a way which penetrated her fuel tanks and caused her watertight compartment system to fail, she'd listed severely to one side. And the following morning, she'd floundered and slipped below the waves, all while being filmed and photographed by planes flying overhead. The accident claimed the lives of 51 people, 46 on the Andrea Doria, and 5 aboard the Stockholm. It had been the deadliest maritime accident since the Titanic. I thought about this as I listened to the music, Diana's voice shifting into roller coaster blues. It always gave me a bit of an eerie feeling, knowing I was going to a place which, for many, had been where their lives had been snuffed out. For a moment, the thought made the now dark ocean outside the porthole take on a slightly sinister atmosphere, and the childish part of my mind raced with images of slimy, shimmering monsters slipping through the depths, their mouths poised open to snatch anything unsuspecting in their path. I shook my head. Get a grip, Mitchell. It's a shipwreck, not a haunted house, and not a horror movie. I glanced at the depth gauge. Passing 130 feet, I said into the mic, then leaned towards the porthole. The eerie emotion and thoughts had slipped away, and I was once again gripped by excitement. In less than 10 minutes, I'd be flicking on the outside lights and seeing her for the first time.
"Copy that, Mitch,"
Victor said.
"The divers are moving down the anchor line. They'll have about half an hour to 45 minutes bottom time before having to ascend to complete their decompression stops."
I copied, knowing that somewhere above, the other 4 were swimming down the huge anchor chain towards me. As I reached 140 feet, I reached out and flipped the switches for the exterior lights. Instantly, the darkness which had surrounded me for the last 20 minutes was banished away, both from the porthole and hull-mounted cameras which fed back to screens around me. I felt my pulse quicken as I suddenly caught a glimpse of something floating out of the darkness. The thoughts of monsters returned with a vengeance for a moment, until I realized what I was seeing. Nets. It's fishing nets. The wreck had caught many fishing nets over the course of the close to 66 years she'd sat on the ocean floor, making it more than a bit of a hazard for divers and submersibles alike. The wreck had already claimed the lives of multiple scuba divers over the years for that exact reason. It suddenly dawned on me that it meant I had to be almost directly on top of the wreck, a very dangerous place for me to be. Cursing softly to myself, I gripped the joystick with a slightly sweaty hand and maneuvered the halibut about 100 feet to the left, turning it to face where I'd come from. And I finally saw it, with my own eyes, what I'd waited to see for decades. Holy shit. I breathed out softly. I'd been right to move when I had. I almost forgot she was 90 feet wide. Directly in front of me, the porthole was filled with nothing but the immense shape of the ship's portside hull, which had reeks of rust accumulating on it. You could barely see the black and white paint which once adorned the hull, except for in very small patches. Glancing at the screens for the left and right cameras, I saw that I was almost directly in the midsection of the ship. Both the fore and aft sections of the ship stretched away from me out into the darkness beyond the lights. I reached out and hit pause on the music, hitting the record button on the cameras. I tapped the mic. "Control, this is Halibut. We have found the Doria." Through the headset, I could hear the team back topside clap and congratulate each other. And then Victor spoke.
"Copy that, Halibut. How's she looking?"
I maneuvered the submersible a little further away from the wreck, looking down at her where she lay on her starboard side on the ocean floor. I tapped my mic again. "Well, the experts were right. She's disintegrating in the currents rather quickly. The entire top of her has basically fallen away, revealing the inner compartments and rooms." I stared at the massive gaping hole running down the middle of the once great ship, where the bridge, upper decks, and first-class cabins had once been. Seeing her like this filled me with a giant pang of sadness as I quickly glanced at the photo of her in her glory days. From that beauty to this. I continued. "The fishing nets we got reports of are still here, so warn the divers to stay clear of them, and the great opening will likely be the best way for them to enter the ship." There was a larger burst of static as I felt a rather strong gust of ocean current hit the sub, jostling it slightly, the rushing sound of cold water likely coming from the Labrador current past me.
"Copy that. We'll pass the message along,"
Victor said, but I wasn't listening any longer. My eyes were fixated on a camera pointed down and to the left, facing into the interior of the ship. Out of the corner of my eye, I'd caught the glimpse of something darting across the screen. Something I hadn't been able to see properly. All I knew was that it had been extremely fast. What the hell was that? I kept staring at the screen, waiting to see if it would show up again.
"Mitch, everything alright?"
I started as Victor's voice filled my ears again, knocking me out of the almost trance-like state I'd fallen into. Yeah, sorry about that, Vic. I copy your last," I said, my voice trailing off.
"You sure?"
His voice held a slightly concerned tone. I debated for a moment, not telling him what I'd seen, then decided to come clean. Keeping secrets down here could cost both myself and the divers soon to arrive their lives. "Yeah, just, I swear I caught a glimpse of something moving through the wreck, closer to the starboard side," I admitted.
"What'd it look like?"
he asked, sounding both curious and wary. "I honestly didn't see enough of it to know. It was just a quick flash and then gone," I replied. There was a moment's pause as I heard him talking with the others. Then his voice came back strong.
"Copy that. The guys up here say that it likely was just a fish moving through the wreck, but keep an eye out for it again, regardless."
I was about to acknowledge him when I heard another voice cut through the speakers.
"Control, this is Andrews. We've reached the bottom and can see the lights of the halibut off to our left."
It was Bradley, the leader of our 4-person diving team, speaking through a microphone mounted in his mask.
"Copy that, Andrews. Proceed to the sub, and then prepare for entry to the wreck. You've got 20 minutes to work now."
Unlike myself, the diving team only had a short time to stay at these depths. They had to ascend back to the surface slowly and stop at certain points to to make sure the gases formed in their bodies from being so deep didn't cause them to develop the bends, which could be fatal. Almost as if on cue, I saw the small lights of the 4 divers appear, followed by themselves as they swam into the range of the submersible's lights.
Enjoying the view, Mitch?
I heard Stephanie, one of the divers, ask me through comms. I shook my head, allowing a small smile to creep back on my face at the sound of excitement in her voice. Even starting to go, she's still gorgeous, I admitted.
She's not what she used to be, is she?
Pedro, another of the divers, joked.
I wouldn't book a first-class ticket on her now, that's for sure,
said the final member of the diving team, Grace.
Alright, enough with the jokes,
Bradley said seriously.
We don't have much time.
I saw him wave to me.
Mitchell, keep the lights on the exposed intersection,
he said, gesturing with his hand.
We're going to enter now and be back out in...
He checked the diving watch on his wrist.
15 minutes.
I nodded. Copy that, Brad, I said. Be safe and enjoy yourself. I allowed a wistful tone to creep into my voice. I wish I was going in with you guys. Bradley allowed himself a small chuckle.
As do I, my friend. As do I.
And with that, they turned and swam away from the sub, towards the wreck. I watched them go, seeing them flick on more powerful lights as they reached the hull. I saw them split into teams of 2, one entering a passageway towards the stern section and another towards the bow. I tapped my mic. Control, they're inside. Starting the clock. I reached over and hit a digital timer, which began to count down from 15 minutes.
Copy that, Halibut,
Victor said simply, then clicked off. For a few minutes, I was left alone, listening to the sound of a whale echoing off from somewhere much farther out to sea, along with the whirring of the sub's thrusters and the roar of the currents. Then, I heard Bradley speak, his voice slightly muffled by the layer of static due to the ship's hull in the way.
Mitchell, Stephanie and I have reached what has to be the galley of some sort,
he said with a tone of awe.
This place is incredible.
I felt a pang of jealousy tear through me, but bit it back. Copy that, Brad, I said as I heard another voice come through the headset.
Mitch, this is Grace. Pedro and I have reached the passageway. We're going down a deck.
Copy that, I said. Make sure to mark your path so you can find your way back. She acknowledged, then clicked off. As I stared, listening to the 2 teams move through the ship, I thought about the hidden treasure locked deep within the cargo hold. A rare concept car from the mid-50s called the Chrysler Norseman, which had been on the way to an auto show aboard the doomed ship. It's probably little more than the rubber tires and metal shavings by now, I thought. As I daydreamed, I again caught a glimpse of movement on one of the cameras. This time, from one facing to the right. It had been the same vague shape I'd seen before, but this one had seemed different somehow. I tapped my mic. Hey Brad, did either your team or Grace's just stick their head out of one of the passageways? I asked, hoping he'd tell me yes. But the answer I received was not the one I'd wanted.
Negative, Mitch. We're both deep inside the ship. Why?
I felt my pulse quicken slightly and swallowed. I tried to force it away, but the 2 appearances on the cameras had slithered underneath my mental defenses, making me feel as though insects had buried under my skin. I just thought I saw something on one of the cameras, twice now, darting around in the wreck. I forced my voice to remain cool and calm. Do me a favor and keep an eye out, all of you guys. There was a moment of silence.
Copy that, Mitch. Grace, you heard him. Keep an eye out. Copy,
I heard Grace say, her voice sounding a little worried. Sharks, eels, and other creatures love to inhabit shipwrecks. The last thing that needed to happen was for the guys to bump into one in a confined space. I looked at the clock. 9 minutes until they come back out. I thought with a bit of relief that time was passing so quickly. That's when I heard Stephanie's voice come through the comms.
Hey Mitch, did you see that down at the end of the corridor there?
She asked quietly.
No, I didn't.
I heard him answer.
I swear I saw something looking out at us from a doorway or something,
she said. After a second, I heard him answer her.
Well, we've got about 8 minutes left. Let's go take a look.
Before I could tell them to be careful, I heard Pedro's voice speak.
Hey Grace, take a look over there.
I heard him exclaim.
I saw it.
I heard her say.
What the hell was it?
A chill crashed over me as if the hatch above me had opened and allowed the ocean to rush in. They're both seeing something in there. Something wasn't right. All my instincts were telling me so. I tapped my mic. Control, this is the halibut. Both Grad and Grace's team are seeing something in the ship, but are unable to make out what it is. I couldn't help a small shake in my voice. Victor, something isn't copacetic here. I'm recommending pulling them all out and head for the surface. There was a huge burst of static, louder and longer than I'd heard before. I thought I heard Victor's voice somewhere within it, but after a moment, it dropped out completely, leaving only silence. I pulled off the headphones and stared at them, running my hands down the wire to make sure I hadn't accidentally unplugged them. What the hell is going on? We're only 220 feet down. This hasn't failed us even when we were 2.5 miles underwater. As I fumbled with the headset, I froze as a sensation fell over me. It was the feeling of being watched. And in a one-man submersible over 200 feet in the dark ocean, it was one that I'd never experienced before. I forced my eyes over to the small porthole, half expecting to see a giant eye pressing against the glass. Nothing was there, but the feeling remained, filling me with a sense of dread I'd never had when diving before. I had begun to put the headset back on when a sound blared out, causing me to let out a short yell. It was the boombox. Somehow, the music had begun to play again. Only now, it was playing out of more than just the stereo's speakers. We'd wired it to play out of an underwater speaker mounted on top of the submersible for when doing more shallow water dives, to give the divers something to listen to while working, though we always kept it shut off during deep ocean dives. Now though, it had turned on, and the music was blasting out into the ocean along with inside the sub. I jammed the headset back on my head and began to fumble with the boombox's controls, trying to turn the music off. But no matter what I pressed, or how hard I hit it, it refused to stop playing, nor would the speaker turn off.
Mitchell, Bradley here. What the hell are you doing?
I heard Bradley call through the headset. I'm not doing anything, I yelled. The music turned on for no reason. As I fought to regain control over the CD, I heard him call for everyone to leave the ship. As I was left alone again for a moment, I suddenly realized something. The song playing wasn't the next one on the track list. It was one from the beginning of the disc. Diana was singing the first track, a song called The Point of No Return. For some reason, the realization of the song caused another shiver to shoot up my spine as I listened to her singing about being beyond the point of no return, asking why not give in and to let yourself go. That's when I heard Bradley's voice.
Stephanie? What the hell is that?
The tone of his voice held something I'd never heard before. Fear. The man was an experienced ex-Navy diver, someone who'd done underwater combat. He'd never lost it over anything, not even a pack of aggressive Humboldt squid off the coast of California. To hear him palpably afraid made me feel beyond terrified.
Oh God.
I heard Stephanie gasp out. A second later, Grace's voice stepped into my ears, filled with panic.
Mitchell, there's something in here with us.
She shouted.
Oh fuck me, there's more of them.
Pedro screamed.
They're all around us.
That had been from Stephanie. I jammed down the transmit button. Guys, get out of there right now, I ordered, my own voice shaking. But the comms were filled with chaos.
Jesus, there's at least 10 or 20 of them coming from all directions.
Bradley called.
Stephanie, in here.
At the same time, Grace called out to me.
Mitchell, there's at least 20 or 25 coming out of the dark towards us. We can't tell what they are. They're just shadows out of the light.
Pedro cut in.
Oh my God, that can't be.
His voice trailed off. And then the entire channel was taken over by an almost painful burst of static. I stabbed the transmit button. Grace, Pedro, Stephanie, Brad, anyone? Answer me. The only thing I received was static as the song began to repeat itself. I put my hand to my mouth, feeling horror like I'd never felt flow through me. I've got to try the surface again. I reached for the switch to swap over to the surface channel again when multiple ear-piercing sounds assaulted my ears as I listened to it. I felt the blood in my veins freeze into ice. It was the sound of my 4 co-workers, my 4 friends, screaming. They were all screaming at the same time, each wail overlapping the other. All of them sounded as though they were being tortured in the worst way possible. It was the most horrific, pained sound I'd ever heard. For what had to be less than 20 seconds, but what felt like an eternity, they continued to scream, never drawing in breath. Just unending screams, which I would have thought would have torn their vocal cords, before all comms cut to static. My breathing came in short, ragged gasps, as I fought to keep myself from falling into a panic attack. Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck. It kept repeating itself in my head. Tears began to fall from my face, both for my friends and the amount of fear sweeping through me like a snake's venom. That was when all the lights and cameras in the submersible went out, plunging me into complete darkness. The music died away as well. I fought back a scream, fumbling around in the blackness. There was a tiny amount of light coming from the gauges for the depth and power, showing me that the motors still had power. Then, why did everything else go? The thought was torn from me, as something slammed into the side of the halibut, enough to pitch me into something, causing a searing pain to flash through my head. In the dark, I felt the warm trickle of what had to be blood begin to drip from what had to be a pretty nasty gash. What the fuck? As I attempted to sit back down, another impact struck the sub, this time from the opposite side. It was followed by another, and a second later, the submersible began to be pummeled from all directions by God only knew what. All of a sudden, the music blasted back into life, louder than it had been before. The point of no return began to scream into my ears. I screamed as well, my voice almost overwhelming the vocals. I don't want to die down here. I screamed in my own mind. Impact after impact kept coming, and I knew the sub could only take it for so long. After enough, it would implode, and along with it would go me. Feeling a wave of determination surge through me, I crashed around in the dark like a bull in a china shop, trying to find a switch to fill the ballast tanks with air. I leaned forward, fumbling as the song threatened to overwhelm my own screaming thoughts. I began to feel despair as I heard a loud groan come from the submersible's outer hull, as if it was screaming out in protest itself. That's when I felt my hand grab onto what I'd been looking for, screaming out loud again, this time more of a battle cry than of terror. I slammed it upwards. For a moment, nothing happened. I looked forward, towards where the porthole to the outside was. The low glow of the gauges barely illuminated it. It also illuminated something else, something which drained all the blood from my face and made me scream, louder than I ever had in my life. And then, the submersible began to rise, very slowly at first, but as the tanks filled with more air, it rose quicker. I saw the depth gauge rise to 110 feet, and saw the first beams of light begin to flicker down from the surface. As I kept climbing away from the hell beneath me, I pulled my knee up against my chest, curling myself into a ball, and began to sob, loudly. As the sub rose to 80 feet, the music, that damned music, finally died away, seeming to short out completely, leaving nothing but the sound of water rushing by. That's how they found me, curled up in a ball on the pilot seat, unable to stop crying. They immediately pulled me out, and after patching up my head wound, took me to the ship's hyperbaric chamber, fearing my rapid ascent had given me the bends. After a few days of observation, I was allowed out, where Victor pulled me by myself into an empty room. "What the hell happened down there?" he asked, almost desperately. I almost lied to him, fearing I'd be slapped with some sort of post-traumatic disorder label. But I came clean, telling him everything I'd seen and heard, not to mention experienced at the end. He was silent for a long time, then led me out to the rear deck of the ship. We had already begun steaming back to port. As we approached the stern where the halibut dangled from her hook, he wordlessly pointed to it. I couldn't help but gasp as I finally got to see her after surfacing. Almost every square inch of her exterior hull had multiple dents in the sturdy metal. Normally, it would take having to slam straight into a wreck or reef to cause even a tiny dent to show up. But it looked like someone with the strength of Superman had taken a baseball bat to it. My jaw hanging open, I turned to Victor, who said nothing. He said nothing more for the rest of the trip back. There was a huge inquiry when we got back to shore, both by the company and the Coast Guard. We all were forced to take the stand in a closed hearing that I found out later nobody knew about. Many divers had died on the wreck before, but this was the single biggest diving disaster that had ever happened on it. After a long deliberation, the committee overseeing everything came to the conclusion that it had been negligence on the part of Victor and the others on the surface, which had led to the 4 deaths. As I was trapped in the sup, I could do nothing to help, and was therefore absolved of anything. But Victor and the entire team were fired, and fined massively. The committee also declared that nobody aside from the people in the room would ever know that they died inside the wreck. They gave some asinine excuse as to why, which I didn't pay too much attention to. The families of the 4 were told they had died on another diving expedition and that their bodies were too deep to be recovered. We were all forced to sign a metric fuck ton of NDAs, warning of jail time if we ever attempted to tell the press or anyone else, which I'm breaking by posting this here. I honestly couldn't give a damn at this point anyways. I immediately quit my job with the company as soon as it all ended. They gave me a nice parting bonus, saying it was for years of loyal service. I knew it was actually hush money. I can't even look at the ocean now without a feeling as though I'm going to begin screaming my head off. And my dreams are constantly plagued with nightmares, always going back to that tiny cramped space, hearing my friends' screams somewhere inside the wreck, hearing that damned song repeating itself, almost like it had been a message, and seeing what I had through the porthole in the dim light. Listen, I'm posting this both to finally share what had happened to them, to me, and to give you a warning, especially to scuba divers and other researchers. You need to stay away from the wreck of the Andrea Doria. Everyone does. It's not safe. Let it rust and rot away until it's nothing more than a pile of metal lying on the seabed. And even then, stay far away, because the ship still has occupants. And I think that the divers who have lost their lives over the years didn't just drown in the nets or get lost inside. Not all of them at least. Why do I think that? Because of what I saw out of that porthole pressed up against the glass. Something which was worse than any sea monster I could have seen. Something that causes me to constantly wake up screaming in the middle of the night. I saw a hand. A human hand.